Well, welcome to the campfire, fellow mountain men, mountain mamas out there. Yeah, it's kind of cool to hear there's a few women, at least a few anyway. Some kids watching, listening. She's a little icy, so I don't have very good insurance, but I guess the Lord's brought me through a lot of scrapes up till now, so surviving around this slippery campfire shouldn't be anything I can't handle here. So, this is episode number 6. So Don Johnson was a local farmer. I knew of him my whole life. I'd heard my dad talk about him. He farmed just 5-6 miles from here. I grew up just a couple of miles here across Upper Turtle Lake from where I'm living now, from right here. So I heard the name. My dad talked about him a lot. If you know anything about farmers, you know, they kind of know everybody, you know. The farming community, pretty tight-knit, or it sure used to be when I was a kid. And so Don contacted me about caribou hunting. Gosh, it's been 7, 8, 9 years ago now. And then we ended up moving, built a house right near where Don Johnson lives. We went to the same church for a period of time. And Don contacted me and he said, hey, I want to go on a caribou hunt. And he wanted to do it with his cousin, Mike, and then Mike's son, Greg. So Don was like 55-ish at the time, maybe 60. Mike was about the same age, probably about 60, a little older. If you've seen the video of this hunt, I'll just jab Mike and say that Mike's probably older than Don. But if you watch the video, you'll kind of understand the context. Mike was a bit of a character. Mike's son, Greg, was like 27 at the time. So we get everything underway. They show up in the Brooks Range. It was 1st of August, so it's pretty early. Bulls are in velvet, fair number of bugs. Tundra's pretty green. And early in the season, especially if you're having warm weather, I mean, there's just a lot of factors that play anytime when you're hunting caribou, but in the early season, weather seems to be a huge deal, and maybe even more so bugs. But that year we had pretty good caribou numbers, good huntable numbers, or good huntable herds. Not a lot were in the area, but we did have enough to hunt. Hey, Bubba.
Hi.
I got my coffee delivery girl. Don't get too close to the fire because it's kind of icy. Okay? All right. Thanks, Bubba.
Yep.
And so we were camped. We landed on this gravel bar, which, man, I really don't like. Camping on gravel bars, it's not much fun because you're always bringing in sand to the tent, and particularly you run the risk if the river goes high, depending on how high the gravel bar is, obviously. But if you get rain, you know, gravel bars have a tendency to flood out. And so anytime you can, ideally you want to be on a tundra bench, but that's just because it's cleaner, it's more stable, but that's not always possible, particularly when you're hunting caribou, because, you know, so often when you're hunting caribou, migrating caribou anyway, you know, the pilot's got to find a spot to land, oftentimes where they've never landed before. And gravel bars are pretty easy to tell, you know, if you can land there or not, and also not very much of tundra can you land on. And so they were operating on a Matt Thoft and Jake Saplanda, very good pilots. They were operating on a pretty short strip as it was, right next to the river. And so the idea was, let's get in there, you know, and get 3 caribou and, you know, hopefully get them fairly quick and before we have any issues. You know, what we were doing wasn't uncommon, you know, but just over the years of guiding, I've just come to recognize that you're always, you know, and Matt and Jake, they knew that too. you set up camp or land on gravel bars, you're always at a risk, particularly if they're low again, of them flooding out, and then you've got to move tent, maybe hike somewhere. You hear a lot of horror stories about that. You got to hike the whole camp 4 miles or whatever to some ridge top or something where they can land and pick you up. But the reason why we were there is because we were in the middle of these herds of caribou. So we land, set up camp, or I land, set up camp. Don, Greg, and Mike, they show up. Got a couple of tents. They were in a pretty big, 6-man tent. I had a little pup tent, and then I had kind of this ramshackle fly set up in the willows, kind of like a cooking area where we could kind of hang out, So we were set up pretty good. There was a hill right across the river from our camp, and the river was just a little creek, a trickle. You could walk across it with ankle deep water. You didn't even need gaiters on your boots necessarily. So then there was a hill just half mile away, maybe a mile away from camp tops, that we could use as a vantage point. So we land first day, wake up the next morning, and it's pretty foggy. Eat breakfast underneath our tarp. Greg kind of had his stuff dialed in, young guy, done a fair bit of research. He kind of had his gear all lined out. He kind of took care of his dad, Mike, as far as gear. And he was ready to go first thing in the morning. We just finished breakfast, and all of a sudden the fog kind of breaks up a little bit, and there I see some caribou. We'll start glassing, and here there's a herd of, remember, that's been 5-6 years now. I'm gonna guess there was a couple hundred caribou in that herd, and there was some pretty good big bulls in there. Back in my younger days, I'd have probably just tried to lambaste 3 bulls all in that same herd, but I don't know, I'm getting to be kind of artsy-fartsy and philosophical? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, philosophical. I think that's a word. And so I like to get, ideally, all 3 hunters experience their own stalk. I kind of feel like in a situation like that, had we all just lined up and shot the 3 biggest bulls, and there was good bulls out of that herd, no doubt about it, that'd have been fine and good, but years down the road, it's just not quite the same, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like flock shooting a bunch of geese, or it's just not the same. So the idea is that because Greg was the only one ready, that he and I were going to go and sneak up on these caribou, and Don and Mike were kind of following behind. They got ready pretty quick, but we made a hasty stalk. Long story short, Greg gets a caribou, I pretty much think the best bull out of the bunch. And by that time they were kind of spooked and they were kind of moving on, and we couldn't catch them. So we were just happy to get the one, and Mike and Don, they both agreed that, yeah, that'd be kind of nice to each of us have our own stalk. Then you can kind of just savor the moment, like for Greg, we were able to butcher his bull, pack it out, everybody helped pack it out. But they recognize that you also run the risk, especially with caribou hunting, because they can be here one day and gone the next, kind of run the risk of, who knows what'll happen beyond that if you'll get another opportunity. Obviously, usually you do, but sometimes you don't. But Mike and Don both agreed, hey, we're here for the experience. Let's just try to do them one at a time, let the cards fall where they may. So as we were butchering out Greg's caribou, it started to rain. No big deal. Packed the caribou back. I don't recall, I think it kind of fogged in on us, started raining pretty hard that afternoon. We could see we could see some tundra from camp, but not a lot, And I can't even just remember, maybe we did climb the hill in the afternoon. Seems to me we didn't, but whatever the case, all we really saw, we maybe saw a few caribou that afternoon, but it continued to rain. Next morning, we woke up, still raining, river's coming up a little bit, no big deal. Shimmy across the river, climb up on the hill, we start glassing. One thing was pretty cool, we saw a wolf. He was working in and out of these willows, and I knew he must have had a kill or something in there. Well, then this grizzly bear comes working around, and he eventually finds where that wolf was working. Next thing you know, the wolf shoots out of there, and that grizzly bear starts dragging a caribou, presumably, out. He had more or less stole that wolf's kill. So then that wolf started moving around. I think there was 2 wolves, if I'm remembering right. One started working Greg's kill. The season wasn't open yet, so we weren't able to shoot the wolf, but it was still pretty cool just to watch that wolf. Didn't get on any caribou. We were seeing a few. Again, rain, fog, just kind of fighting weather. And I don't remember now if it was would have been the 3rd day, I'm guessing, 3rd or 4th day. But whatever the case was, that rain just never quit. And so 3rd or 4th morning we wake up, and that little trickle of water next to our camp, again, to get to the glassing knob, that we had to cross to get to the glassing knob, it was like a torrent. You know, I mean, you just wake up in the morning and, you know, you could tell that there was some water running through that puppy, and it was still raining. So to get across, let this be a lesson to all the hunters out there. You know, I told the guys, you know, yeah, you should bring some Wiggies waders, these nylon hip boots basically that you put over your hunting boots, and then you just throw them in your pack. They're basically just for creek crossings. Well, I think Mike had some hip boots. Greg and Don didn't have anything, and the river was like almost too wide to really throw the Wiggies across. It was kind of sketchy to get them across. Well, Don and Greg, they just decided that they would just man up and go across. They just put their rain pants on and just went across and got wet. And it was pretty dicey. Greg fell in. But he was able to get up, and he had his boots over his shoulders. I don't know if he was wearing Crocs or whatever when he crossed, but he ended up getting his boots wet. Don made it across, Mike made it across, we climbed up on the hill. And so as we were climbing the hill, right below us was this stretch of river where there was this really wide riffle. Man, I would say had to be over 60 yards. I would say probably about 80 yards wide. So I was watching, there was this little gravel island, and I kind of was glassing that and timing it and watching the rate at which the river was rising. And I figured it was rising about 2 inches an hour. So I told myself, if we're not on caribou by 10 o'clock, I think it was, that, you know, that a cutoff to get across the river is noon. You know, so as long as we're getting across before noon, that's fine, but we're not really chasing after anything after 10 o'clock. And so we're glassing, and of course, we spot some caribou. About 9 o'clock, they're on our side of the river. Actually, they were on the other side of the river, the side of camp, but they had come across. They were about 1.5 miles out, and I just said, all right, you know, this river's coming up fast, you know, today's gonna be the last day we can get across this river, so we're gonna have to move camp tomorrow or do something different tomorrow. We're not gonna be able to come over here anyway. So I said, let's go after these caribou. If we don't get on them, then we'll just go back to camp and we'll regroup, you know. And so everybody kind of agreed. I think Don was happy to oblige. I remember he was fairly cold and wet. You know, it was damp. It wasn't comfortable by any stretch. Sun was definitely not out. Completely overcast, raining nonstop. So we chase after these caribou. They kind of disappear up into this little. It wasn't really a canyon. I mean, the terrain was very much rolling, very much open. A few willows in the creek bottom. But they disappeared into this little draw. I mean, just a real subtle draw, bowl, if you will. We get up there. We made pretty good time. I don't know, that 1.5 hours probably took us about 30, 40 minutes. Get up there, caribou are gone. Well, then there's this little ridge. Yeah, it was only about 1/2 mile ahead. I just said, well, let's just hot-foot it up there, and the caribou, they gotta be right in there, because you can see basically everything but what was over this little knoll. Of course, you know how that goes. You try to get up over this little knoll. Well, then you realize, okay, well, there's another knoll ahead. So that was about another 500 yards or so. So we get up into this knoll and you can see most of this canyon or bowl that I was looking for. And the caribou weren't moving terribly fast. It was cool enough. The bugs weren't bad. So they were kind of in feed mode. They weren't necessarily in, travel mode. But they were still moving. And then another 400 yards, again, maybe 500 yards, you can see is a good, hard ridge, where it was definitely the plateau. And at this point, it was about noon, and I knew, or pushing noon, and I knew that we were pushing the envelope, and I'm starting to get pretty antsy. And in my mind, I don't think that the guys recognize how much, Greg, Mike, and Don, how much that river is coming up. So I'm starting to get pretty serious in my tone, I would say, trying not to show the guys that I'm I shouldn't say that I'm freaked out, but that I'm getting concerned. I didn't want to put any fear into them about it, but in the same token, we had, roughly half our hunt gone, and we still had 2 caribou to kill, because I didn't know how much longer this weather was going to last, because as it was, there was no flying. The visibility was way too low. At any rate, I just told the guys, let's get up to this hill, let's get up there and, see where these caribou are at, and if they're not there, we're gonna have to get back to camp, go back across the river. Right? They all agreed. So we climb up to that next hill, and once you know it, the caribou are out there 800 yards. And I'm like, all right, and they're bedded. I'm like, we don't have time to be waiting around for this. I said, let's just go right at them. Hopefully we can get close enough and get a shot. They agreed. Well, as soon as we start going right at them, the caribou get up and they start feeding our way. And so I'm like, well, let's just wait for them. So we're right more or less at the top of that hill. We get Don set up prone. These caribou feed our way. Of course, it takes a long time for them to do that. Finally, the caribou are, I don't know, about 300 yards, and they're kind of turning broadside. Pretty decent setup. And Don takes a shot, boom, shoots the right bull. Of course, then they cluster together. The bull is definitely hit, but he doesn't go down right away. So the bull's hit a little bit far back, and he goes and beds down about 600-700 yards out. The rest of the herd takes off, and we ended up killing a bunch of time just to finish off the bull. So that was probably another half hour. So by this time, it's like 1 o'clock when we go down to the bull. And I'm like, I mean, maybe it was even later than that, to be honest. It's late, and then I'm getting out of my comfort zone here. Like, all right, guys, let's get some pictures, and let's butcher this thing up, and we got to get back to camp. They all agreed. So take a few quick pictures. We butcher it up. Everybody did their job, Greg was helping. Mike and Don were bagging the meat. I mean, my knife was slinging. And just as a rule, if you ever watch my videos, I talk about it a fair bit. But one thing that I've learned is one man runs a knife. That's it. Everybody has horror stories or hears them. If you hunt in Alaska, or you know any guides or people that hunt in Alaska, doing the old thump, they stab themselves in the leg. So you don't want to get into a hurry butchering an animal. And so I find it's way faster and a lot safer. Usually it's me and one guy is holding, pulling the hide, dealing with the meat, grabbing game bags, leveraging a quarter or whatever. It seems to work way better than 2 guys trying to use knives. Anyways, we get the bull butchered. I'm like, all right, we get it all packed up. Everybody's loaded. I'm like, all right, everybody got everything? Let's head back. And Don's like, well, I don't have my binoculars. I'm like, well, you know where they are? He's like, well, yeah, I took them off before I shot. They got to be up on the hill, where I shot. He's like, yeah, don't worry, we'll come back and get them tomorrow. And I'm like, we ain't coming back here tomorrow. There's no tomorrow. And I'm like, what kind of binoculars are they? He's like, oh, they're Nikons. And I'm like, well, Nikons, I don't know if they're really worth it or not. Not that they're bad binoculars, but a few $100 you can replace them versus, others that are $2,000-3,000. And I just said, all right, you guys see that one little willow bush there, which was about a half mile out? I said, you guys go to that willow bush, go there as fast as you can, don't stop until you get there, And when you get there, stop and don't move until I get there. And as Don told me later, at that point, he knew that at that moment I was serious. And they told me that that's when they really knew that I was really concerned about the river. And I think they were too before that happened. But I stormed up to the top of the hill, grabbed the binoculars, threw them in my pack, and by the time I got down, those guys were just getting to the willow bush, and I said, all right, guys, I can't remember, maybe they were sitting there taking a break, and I'm like, we got to keep moving. We got to get back. As soon as we get back across that river, then you guys can take a break as long as you want. And we hadn't stopped for lunch at all, and Don said something about needed a drink of water or eat something, and I said, yeah, take a drink of water, grab some candy bars, and eat them as we're hiking, because we got to move. So I set a pretty good pace, and that's one thing that I've found, as a guide, I'll often, you hear a lot of horror stories about this, about clients, how their guide was always ahead of them. There is a fine line there. As a guide, oftentimes, particularly in a situation like that, I want to go ahead for a number of reasons. First off, I want to set a pace. I want to push those guys. And I kind of, in a situation like that, because we're kind of in a hurry, I don't want to get too far ahead of them. I kind of always want them to more or less think they can catch me. To push them to their max. I don't want them to keel over a heart attack, but at the same token, we're not out there for a Sunday stroll. And also, I like to go ahead because, maybe I'll go walking along and then I'll come to this slough of water or something that I can't get across, and then we've got to backtrack to get around it. Well, if my hunter's right behind me, guess what? The hunter's got to do the backtrack just like I do. So if your guide's doing that, there's oftentimes a reason. Now, that said, I've heard stories about guides, or one guide in particular was explaining to me how he popped over the mountain and there was the ram they were after, and he yelled for his dumb hunter to shoot, shoot, shoot. Well, here his hunter was 100 yards below him because he couldn't keep up. Now, in that instance, the guide is, 100% at fault. There's times where obviously the hunter needs to be right with you. The guide can't shoot the animal without the hunter, but there is a time and place for a guide to go ahead of a client, and this was one of them. So I was in the lead, Greg was following, maybe 100 yards behind, and then Don and Mike were kind of pulling up the rear, but they were doing good. We were making pretty good time. At one point, a wolverine flushed out of the brush, right in front of me, and I didn't even bother to make note of it because I just didn't want to slow the guys up at all, but it was pretty cool just watching that wolverine. He just kind of loped up onto this nearby little hillside about 60, 70 yards away and just kind of stood and looked at me. He had a bone from presumably, I don't know, it was either from the kill that the wolf kill that the grizzly had taken over or from Greg's caribou, but he was packing a bone off, so that was kind of cool to see the wolverine. But eventually we get to the river, and we actually walked past camp about a half mile or so, and we went to that stretch of the river that was right below our glassing knob that I said was about 80 yards wide. Well, at this point, it's swollen, the water's right up to the willows. So you could see that this was abnormally, it was flood stage. So I had kind of previously marked a spot from when I was up on the hill, a line that we should go across. And when I got to that river, I knew it was going to be up quite a bit. And when I got to that river, I was like, my jaw just, was just, wow. And so before Greg caught up to me, I just said a prayer because I knew we were going to need it. I knew this was going to be probably, if not the diciest river crossing I'd ever done or would do, at least with clients. It was right up there. And because there was so much water and it was so wide, I knew a lot of it wasn't probably going to be super dangerous, but that water was moving so fast. And when Greg comes along and he meets me and we part the willow brush, look at that river, he's like, whoa. Pretty soon Don and Greg get there and they both said the exact same thing, whoa. And so we're kind of sitting there talking about it, and Don's like, I don't know about this. he's like, I can't swim. And I'm like, man, not that being able to swim was necessarily going to help you a whole bunch, but just because that water was very, very strong. And he said to me, he's like, I'm not questioning you, he said, but my biggest fear in life is death by drowning. And come to find out, Don had nearly drowned when he was a young kid in the Mississippi River. Him and his stepbrothers or half-brothers, they were fishing on some backwaters of the Mississippi, and they were smoking cigarettes. And before their dad came back to pick them up, they had to get rid of the cigarette butts. And so Don went out towards the open water somewhat to get rid of these butts. Meanwhile, he falls in the water. And by the grace of God, there was a log that was kind of jammed into the mud or the bottom, whatever, kind of like at a 30, 45 degree angle, something like that. And he found that. And he was able to climb up that log, get on the ice, and disperse his weight enough and get out. And so ever since then, as he said it, his biggest fear in life was death by drowning. And so here I am, about to lug him across this angry river that I was nervous about. But he said, can't we just stay here and spend the night? And I'm like, man, it could be days before we could fly and get over here. And there's no place that I know of to land other than a helicopter, which a helicopter, where we were up way in northern Alaska, that's going to be many hours, if not a day or more to get here. And Don's wet at that point. He's soaking wet. And I said, there's a good chance, for us to just try to survive by morning is going to be, we maybe could have got a fire going, but boy, it'd have been tough. And I just said, man, we'd maybe be dead by morning. I said, we got to try this. I said, I think I got to go across, see what it's like, and then we go from there. And so, long story short, we all agreed that that's what we'd do. I'd go across and one at a time, and we'd see what happened. And I told him before I left, and this is one thing that I found out when you're getting into like a dicey situation, or where danger is very much possible, you've got to give very simple instructions. And so I told the guys, all right, you have your waist belt attached, but not your chest strap. Just your shoulder straps, your waist belt, that's it. I said, if you go down, pull your waist belt, shuck your pack, and just keep your feet down in front of you, keep your feet downstream, and keep your head up. And try to get to shore to safety. Everybody's like, all right. And I said, now watch me where I go and walk directly where I walk unless I tell you otherwise. And so we've all got trekking poles, which I think is a must if you're hunting in Alaska, to bring them at least. Sometimes if it's real brushy terrain, you might not need them, but I'd say bring them along all the time. They really help with crossing water. And also something that helps is having some weight on your pack. It helps stabilize you, you have more weight. And a big difference when the water level is below your crotch versus the water level is above your crotch, big difference. When that water starts hitting your pelvis, everything changes. It's an altogether different animal. So the farther you go from the pelvis up, every inch makes it very much a lot more dangerous. Just put it that way. So I had my video camera on this pouch that I wear basically right there, right where my belt buckle is. So I stuffed that in my pack because this was getting too serious, Hindsight, maybe could have pulled out my GoPro, but at that point I couldn't be worrying about filming stuff. I had to be guiding. So I went across. It wasn't no peach, but it was a doable thing. So I went across. Then Mike comes across, no big issues, but I mean, it took some time, we're working the poles, and when you do that, you want to either be going upstream or downstream, never perfectly across, and definitely, ideally, you're kind of quartering in a downstream fashion, so the current kind of pushes you along. So I would just guess, maybe there's probably people that are better that would know better than I would, but I'm just going to guess, and what I find works pretty good is about 20 to 30 degrees downstream. Seems to be about the perfect angle. You don't want to go too much, I don't think. No more than 45. So I get across, Mike gets across, then Greg comes across, and then I had him, he was pretty solid, young buck. He stops in that gravel island that I was telling you about, that I could see the water level rising. You know, there's water all the way around it, but here's just this high point in this gravel bar. And that was probably about knee deep at this point. So that morning I could see it, and now it's knee deep. So that water from when we started, when we went across that river in the morning, that water had gone up all of 20 inches, probably all of 2 feet, to be honest. And so from that little gravel bar, or where it was, submerged island, if you will, it was about a 15 to 20 yard stretch to safety, to solid land. And that was definitely the deepest, fastest water. That's where the main channel was. That was the original river. And so I figured Don was not going to have really any problems getting to Greg. So I just asked Greg to stay there. He agreed, and then Don started over. So Don gets to Greg. So, you know, Greg and Don are together. They're across the river, standing on that little island in knee-deep water. Mike and I are on the shore. We're no more than 20 yards apart. And so I told Don, I said, just take your time, walk right to Mike, use your poles, and obviously when you have swifter water, what's underneath? Well, much bigger rocks, you know, because that water is swifter, that's where the channel is, and so it's washed away the small rocks. And so now you have faster water, deeper water, and less solid footing. You know, you're stepping on bigger rocks there. You're stumbling. You know, there's basketball-sized boulders down there is kind of what you're stepping on in some places anyways. So I went downstream maybe 20, 30 yards, had my pack off at this point just in case anything happened. So Don goes across. You know, I mean, I could tell Don was very nervous. You know, he was probably hunched over more than anything else, more than he had been. You know, because he's nervous, and you know, I mean, rightfully so. I mean, we were all nervous going across that puppy. He gets across right about in the middle of it, and he kind of like overcorrects. He kind of stumbles, overcorrects, pushes down, and he almost falls. And then as he goes to right himself, he kind of pulls himself out of the water, and he's kind of like a bear balancing on a big ball, and he kind of gathers himself. Well, here his trekking pole was in the shape of an L. He had broke it, bent it, whatever, but it was useless. And you know, then he was really shaken, he was scared, but at this point he's got no more than 10 yards to get to the shore. And I just said, all right, relax, you're good, you're stable, relax, you got, you know, 10 more steps, not even, it wasn't even that, you know, 5, 6 more steps I told him, because he was right in the heart of the channel, you know. And I said, you know, just a few more steps, you got it, just take your time, just take it easy, just angle downstream, walk right to Mike, you got it. And so Don, he goes and he takes one step, gathers himself a little bit, and he goes to take another step, and he goes to use the trekking pole that he had just bent. You know, I think his muscle memory kicked in from, you know, the past several days of hiking, using those trekking poles. Hindsight 2020, I'd have told him to just throw that pole in the river, you know, and to not have it in his hand. But he had, you know, because he had it there, he went to use that pole, and obviously that pole is only about this long. Boom, down he goes. Don is down in the river, and I mean, Don has disappeared. Don's gone. And at that point, you know, it just, I wouldn't say it was like adrenaline or anything, and I wouldn't say it was like fear, but it was like, in that point, it just, obviously it got real. And so I started into the water, and then all of a sudden, Don just emerges, just like you'd see on a movie, just, and his eyes were wide, he was, you know, gasping for air, and he pops up, and I mean, he's coming down that flow fast. And I mean, I knew that water was strong, but he's coming quick, so I start charging out into the water. And I mean, he's coming like a little rubber ducky in one of those fair games, you know, with the canal, and you grab the duck. I mean, he's coming by, and I know that I'm going to have one chance to grab him. And so I get out there, and I'm in pretty deep water. You know, I don't have any waders on or anything. It's just my hunting boots. So, you know, we didn't bother putting any waders on or anything for this part of the crossing because I knew we needed as solid footing as we could get, and we were going to go over any waders or hip boots that we had. And because the water was about, at the deepest, the water was about, it was above my waist. I'll say that. I don't know, maybe I wouldn't say it came up to my belly button, but definitely above my waist. But I get out into the water now, and I'm right up to my crotch height, and Don's coming my way. He goes back down again, and this time he pops up and he's coughing and he's spitting and he's sputtering, and I still got pretty good confidence that I'm going to be able to you know, grab him and fish him out. And so as he comes by me and I grab him and I start pulling him to shore, I'm making some progress, but I was foolish. I more or less tried to pull him straight to the shore. I should have been kind of going along with him with the current and kind of trying to angle at a 45 degree angle to the shore. So as he's floating down, he's still floating, and I'm pulling and I'm gaining. But then as soon as he gets 1 degree downstream of perpendicular, all of a sudden I feel the force of that river pulling him. And again, another mistake that I made is I had the antlers on Don's pack. Of course, every hunter wants to have his antlers, take the picture, a little bit of a glory job there. And those antlers, when his body started to turn, because I was, I had a hold of him kind of by the shoulder strap of his pack. So then his body started to turn. Well, then those antlers started dragging on the current, and then that was it. That current was just so strong, so fast. Next thing I know, I get pulled right in the water with him. And before I know it, I can feel no gravel under my feet. Don and I are like right to here in water. I mean, right to our mouths. We're basically all we can do. We cannot feel bottom. We are just trying to gasp for air. And all this water, I was talking about how it's 100 yards wide, about 20, 30, let's say 40 yards below us. The stream takes a 90-degree bend, and that river narrows down during this time. We're in like a bottleneck. So during this time, the river narrows down from 100 yards to 25 yards, something like that. And then immediately it takes a hard left turn, and there's a steep cut bank, and it's white water right there where that bottleneck occurs, and then the dog legs, there's white water there. And so I know I've ran boats on rivers a fair bit. I know that water's deep. That water is all 100% of it is over your head deep, and that is powerful. There are big boulders there. There is all kinds of physics. I don't know what the right word is just in the moment. There's all kinds of forces, that water is sucking you down. There's eddies and stuff in there. And I knew that if we got to that point, and that's only 30 yards away, 40 yards away max to that turn where I can really see that there's a drop off there. And I knew instantly, I just looked at that, and I knew right then that if we get to there, Don's definitely dead. And I'm screaming, I'm yelling, get your belt off, get your belt off, and I'm reaching over his shoulder, because at this point I'm kind of like hugged up. I'm kind of got the antlers in my arms, I think, and kind of like tucked under my arm a little bit, and I'm trying to side stroke. As my old high school gym teacher would have said, pick a cherry, put it in the basket, push, glide. That's what I remember from the side stroke, because I was not a very good swimmer. I definitely wasn't as a kid. But I'm sitting there trying to side stroke, not feeling anything in the bottom, yelling at Don to get your belt off, get your belt off. I kind of have a hold of him, and I'm reaching around trying to find his belt to pull his pack off. And at one point, Don kind of just like turns to me as I'm yelling at him, get your belt off, get your belt off. He just kind of rotates. I suppose the antlers were just getting pushed to the side and turning him around, spinning him so we were like face to face facing each other. And he just, his eyes were huge. I could just see the fear, see the shock in him. And he just yells, "Is this the end? Is this the end?" I think it was just that fear that he had held on to so long, from what he'd experienced in water, as a kid. That has been his biggest fear in life, is death by drowning. And, obviously in his mind, here it was the end. He was going to drown by, die by drowning. So that I just knew he's going into shock. I'm still yelling at him to get his belt off, and he's kind of yelling that back at me, "Is this the end?" And I'm still trying to side stroke, and then all of a sudden it was like everything got quiet. It was almost as if we stopped. And my mind just raced instantly, just so fast. I saw my kid's face, I saw my wife's face, and I remember just very, very vividly recognizing that I had a decision to make, that I could either hold on or let go. And I just thought about, if I die today, where am I going? What's going to happen to me? And I felt this peace. I felt very calm, that I was as prepared as I ever was going to be spiritually to die. And right then I just made the decision. It wasn't even like at that point, like I just quit thinking, because in that instant, I don't remember any inner dialogue, but at that moment I just knew that if Don dies, I die with him. End of story. So it was like everything went back into hyper fast forward, super crazy, unbelievable motion at that point. And so I'm still yelling, as I recall, I'm yelling for him to get his belt off, or trying to get his belt off. I'm just swimming. I can't even exactly say that I recall, but I know Don's coughing, I'm coughing, and we're just trying to, swimming as much as anything just to keep our heads above water, and trying to go to shore. And we're getting right to that lip, right where that raging water starts. And I just remember thinking, man, how are we going to hold on? Just keep our heads above water and our feet downstream. Because once we hit that rough water, there was going to be no swimming. It was just going to grab us, And I don't even really know how much progress I was necessarily making by swimming anyways. But so I'm holding on to Don, still trying to side stroke, still kicking, still stroking with my left hand. And then all of a sudden I felt gravel under my feet. And I kicked and I dug for all I was worth. I remember digging my toes into that gravel, going, digging for all I was worth. And I just felt like, I don't know. I mean, I just felt like the lip was there, where it was just going to dive off. I mean, if it wasn't right there, it wasn't more than five yards tops. And I just felt like we had enough momentum and I had enough gravel, and I just felt like it was time. And I just remember pulling, pushing, lunging Don. Don very well may have been digging gravel and jumping at the same time. It just all happened so fast. And we just lunged. And I don't know, I'm going to guess we were in like maybe kind of knee-deep water, I mean, we kind of more or less just fell to the shore, I would say. And we just lunged, and I remember we kind of like landed in the water, and I remember coming up, and I knew that was the telltale moment, if we came up and the water still had a hold of us or not. And I just remember being solid, that we were solid. The current didn't have a grip on us anymore. And Don was coughing at that point. Right then, Mike was right there beside us. He was kind of running downstream, I'm sure, as we were going along. And Don kind of gets up and he kind of gets his wits about him. He's coughing. And then at that point, I look at his pack. Well, here his waist belt somehow was like up to here. I mean, it was dang near around his neck. I get his pack off and I'm like, oh, where's your rifle? And he's like, man, I don't know. It's in the torrent, you know, who cares about the rifle, you know? But it just seemed weird pulling a guy's pack off. He didn't have a rifle, but obviously he lost that in the river. And so we gather our wits. Mike asks us if we're all right, you know, we need a hand, you know, we're able to get up and we're standing, and Don just we get his pack off and drag it up onto the shore, and he's just kind of sitting there. He stands up, and we get across, and so we get Greg across. Greg, you know, he did fine. We got Greg, so we're all over on the bank, you know. So I'm like, all right, we got to get back to camp. And at that point, I just said, does anybody mind if I offer a prayer? I mean, I just had to thank God that we were all okay, and nobody had any objections. And I said, all right, you know, everybody okay? Let's pack, you know, get everything loaded back up. And Don's like, well, I got a dry bag with some long underwear in my pack, you know, can I just put them on? I'm soaked. And I'm like, there's no sense in it. I said, we got to cross some more water to get to the tent. And when I said that, kind of without thinking, I wasn't trying to be a wise guy, but Don looked at me, man, with eyes. And had he still had his rifle, I'm fairly certain he would have shot me. But right away, I'm like, no, it's just a back current. There's like a back eddy, kind of like a slough of sorts, but I knew it was going to be deep, but there wasn't going to be any current to it. And so Don agreed that, you know, yeah, let's just get back to camp, because we were only, not even a half mile away. So we raced back to camp, get there as fast as we can. We go through that slough, no big problems. Get Don into the tent, because he's got some level of shock going on for sure. We get him, he gets in his tent, he crawls in his sleeping bag, I go change, everybody change, you know, get our clothes off, get in a sleeping bag, warm up. I was able to do that, it got warm, I had dry clothes and I wasn't super cold, so I started heating up some hot chocolate, gotten some soup or freeze-dried meals going, something, threw it in their tent so they could eat, and then I went back into my sleeping bag. Called base camp, got a hold of Matt, told him what happened, and I just said, hey, you know, we got 2 caribou here, we got the meat in camp, we're losing our runway, so as soon as you guys can come pick up the meat, you know, we probably need to do it, because we're going to potentially lose our runway by morning. I didn't figure our tents were going to flood out, that our camp was going to flood out, but I wasn't sure either. It could have definitely happened. So they copied that, and after a while later that evening, you know, we all got warmed up and we came back out. But I guess in that sleeping bag, you know, that was just one of those moments where I'm just sitting there, and I usually carry my New Testament, and then I carry some pictures of my kids. And you know, that was just, I mean, I still had over 2 months of guiding yet, you know, and that was one of those things where I definitely recognized I'm not going to talk about with my wife until after I get home. Like anytime, you know, back in those days we had sat phones, I'd talk to my wife very sparingly. Hey, you don't want to, you know, rack up a bunch of minutes, because it was like $1 a minute or something. But you know, there's no sense in going into too much detail. And to be quite honest, like even when I do get home, my wife and I don't want to talk about Alaska, you know, or I don't want to talk about my fall. Not that I just want to get back with my family, you know. And my wife, to be quite frank, she doesn't care that much. I mean, a story like that in the end definitely interested her, but I definitely wasn't going to tell her that story while I was still going to be away for 2 months, because she just makes me promise that's our deal, is as long as I'm as safe as I can be and don't do stupid things, which clearly I do some stupid things. I do my share, but I do my best to stay safe and not take too outlandish of risks. And that course and that chain of events was 100% my fault. I pushed the limit too hard. I went beyond all these barriers that I set up myself in good reasoning. You know, at that point, I think I had 18 years of guiding experience. and I just pushed the envelope too hard. I was, I don't know, too concerned. I let the pressure of getting my clients' animals get to me, and I shortcutted their safety, the safety of all of us. And so that was 100% on me. I definitely don't see it as that I saved Don's life. I see it as that I almost killed Don. But anyways, so we get back into camp, we're kind of joking around a little bit that Don took a shower, and took a bath and he's clean and blah, 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 especially Mike. Again, if you see the video, you'll see Mike's character. And Don was handling it very well. So long story short, gets towards evening and the clouds break, and I don't even know, I think it quit raining, but there was a break in the weather, and Matt and Jake, maybe it was just Matt, I don't remember, Matt comes in, and we were going to send the meat out, but we just talked about it a little bit and thought, you know what, we're going to have to move camp the next day anyways, because we can't get across that river, we have no elevation, so we had to get to some higher country. And Matt said, yeah, Bobby's tagged out and he's up in some hills. He said, so why don't I just move you guys there tomorrow? He said, maybe you should just take Don out, take him back to base camp, because it's just going to be another flight for me tomorrow to try to move him into their camp, and everything he owns is wet. And he said maybe it'd be just as well if I just took him out, and I'll we'll come get the meat. I think maybe even it took the meat of Don's caribou at the same time. I don't just remember, but I know we didn't get all the meat. But anyways, we just decided to get Don out that night, get him back to base camp. And so that's what we did. We got him loaded up. And Don, as he told me later, he said he doesn't even necessarily know why, but he specifically remembered that when he took off, he was looking back at us as they took off, got up in the air. He said he looked back the entire time, and he said he looked as hard as he could to watch us, watch our camp. And I suspect he was maybe looking at the river and whatever else. But he said he noticed that he was still looking back when everything was totally out of view. And when he turned his head to look forward, Don recognized that he had been looking back his entire life. And as he put it, make sure I get this right, as he looked forward, he recognized, as he puts it, you can never move forward if you're always looking behind you. You have to let go of the past. And in that moment, just something clicked for Don. And I don't know that he could ever totally communicate it or I totally understand it, but I mean, we've talked about it several times since. So Don goes back to base camp. Next day, we end up moving to a different camp up high in some hills. We get Dale a caribou on the last day. He got a nice bull. Again, there's more to that story, but I don't want to I'm already getting long-winded in this, but so the hunt was over. We get back to base camp. I was going to head up into the sheep mountains, and Dale and Greg and Don, we all reunite, and Don was just happy to be alive. Said he was kind of filling out things in his journal and still kind of digesting the experience. But one thing he just told me, he's like, Billy, I don't regret anything. I don't second guess anything that happened that day. He's like, I don't know if it had to happen that way, but he said, I just want you to know that I don't hold any ill will against you for anything that happened. And he said, as a matter of fact, he goes, why you jumped in that river, I'll never know. Or he's why you stuck with me and stayed with it. And I just said, Don, I'm sorry for just putting you in that position, And so we left on good terms, and I had a couple months of guiding left. I went home. Don and I were, especially at that time, we were still neighbors. We only lived a few miles apart. I had lent Don a bunch of gear, and so here we are, November, October, whatever. He comes over to the house. He was going to return my gear, and we were just going to, sit and chat and visit a little bit. And when he got there, his wife, Sandy, climbs out of the vehicle with him. And when I saw Sandy come out, and Sandy's a very sweet, soft-spoken lady, but I just remember thinking, when she stepped out, I just wanted to make sure she didn't have a club or a bat in her hands, because that was the deal. I saw Sandy before the hunt, and she's like, just make sure he's safe. Oh man, and I almost kill him, and she just comes up and she just gives me a big hug and she just says thank you. And so Don and I, we've gotten to be pretty close. Through that experience, and then when we put this video together, which I title Face to Face. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but Don was very, very willing to share that. He was adamant that I share it. He said, I have nothing to hide, because when I asked him, I was like, there's not much upside for Don to share that story, and there wasn't maybe a lot of upside for me to share that story, but I felt like that those are the kind of stories, the stories that you squirm a little bit before you start to tell them. Those are the only stories that interest me. Those are the only stories that I think really matter in life. And I guess that's kind of why I'm doing this. And I was really glad when Don agreed to, share that story. But I just felt I was going to do a totally different deal. I was going to talk about moose hunting this week, but I just felt strongly, it just hit me really hard yesterday to share this story. And I'm like, well, I woke up this morning and I'm like, what's going to be the ultimate takeaway I want to leave with this? And as I laid awake this morning, just a few minutes, wintertime, I'm pretty lazy. I like to get up when the sun's out, I pop right out of bed, but I usually get up about 6 o'clock. It's still dark here now. So I lay there a little bit, and right away I just remember the verse of no man putting his hand to the plow and looking in either direction is worthy of me. And so I looked that up, but I just remember the bits and pieces, but that came to me. And so here it is, Luke chapter 9, verse 62. But Jesus said to him, no one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. And so what he's talking about is people are talking about, or people were asking him about disciples or people. Well, here, I'll just read verse 57. Now it happened as they journeyed on the road that someone said to him, Jesus, Lord, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Then he said to another, follow me. But the man said, Lord, let me go and bury my father. First go and bury my father. Verse 60, Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and preach the kingdom of God. And another said also, Lord, I will follow you, but let me first go and bid them farewell who are at my house. And here's verse 62. But Jesus said to him, no one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. And just, I don't know, maybe it's just like a simple analogy. But when Don, looking back and recognizing that you can't live life in the past, that you have to look forward. And what I recognize is that, or what it, kind of like means to me anyways, at a bare minimum, is that when by putting in the hand to the plow, Jesus is telling us to follow him is going to be work. It's not going to be easy, and there's going to be distractions in our lives. And Don, at least to some degree, had found some freedom because, whether he hit a rock or a dead furrow or something in his plow as a Christian man, he recognized that to some degree he was looking to the side. He wasn't paying attention. He was looking back behind him. He wasn't paying attention to the work to what he should have been doing. He wasn't looking ahead. He wasn't focusing. And we've all been there. And I just felt strongly to share that verse. And gosh, watch Little House on the Prairie. You watch Charles Ingalls Man in the Plow, and it's pretty easy to understand. And I don't think it could have been a whole lot different in Jesus' day 2,000 years ago. You were running a plow, you had to pay attention. You had the animals to run, you had to set the depth and guide that thing because you obviously wanted to keep that in a straight path. You didn't want to be zigzagging all over the place. Not only were you not going to get the maximum yield out of your crop, but it was going to take you a lot more time and effort. So you poured your attention into that. And I couldn't help but think, nowadays we got a tractor, and if you're plowing a field, your front tire goes down into the dead furrow, and it's like you can almost kind of not pay attention when you're on the straightaway. The tractor's doing all the work, the hydraulics set the depth. You can basically sit there and, listen to the radio and surf the internet. It almost kind of reminds me of like being a Christian nowadays. It's you have more distractions. It's a lot easier to be distracted in our work, in our walk. You'll find somebody to accept you no matter who you are or what you believe. So in some ways I don't want to like make an excuse or anything, but like almost in some ways it's maybe more difficult than ever to keep both hands on the plow and not view side to side, to stay focused on God. And that instance, I guess let me backtrack here, and that there's in the Old Testament when the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when the angels of God told Lot and his family and his wife that they must flee from the city because they were, God was going to destroy it. He said, you mustn't look back. You must run from the city and do not look back. And the whole implication here, I don't entirely understand it, but I suspect it's probably closely linked to that verse, because basically the Old Testament is kind of the precursor or the foreshadowing or the setup of Jesus. But the same thing happened. The disciples told him, don't look back, to flee the city because God was going to destroy it because there was such rampant sin in those cities. And Lot was Abraham's nephew. Well, Lot's wife looked back, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. And so that those are closely related. What that exactly means, I'm not qualified to theorize, I don't think. But that's linked there. That I guess the reason why I mention that is because there's obviously there's something there for us to pay attention to. That if we're following God, there's going to be distractions, and I think one of the things that I love about Alaska, I say it all the time, is when I get there, it helps me cast off and identify man-made distractions in our modern world, because when I get there and I have just the bare essentials for life, more or less, I have pretty nice equipment and whatnot, but I just recognize what's really important. And strangely, when I'm 3,000 miles away from my family, I love them then more than ever, because I recognize that, my God and those people that are in that house right here, that's what really matters. All that other stuff is literally a distraction. I think there are very many things in our lives that distract us from what's real. They kind of numb us, and we're all guilty of it to some degree. I'm not saying that a person shouldn't do things they enjoy doing and have nice things, but if they're distracting us from God and the plow and what we're called to do, that's something that we need to get out of our lives. And it was like, I mean, just, and then the symbolism just kind of came to mind. This is probably like the writer and the storyteller in me, but it almost was like going down in that river almost was like a baptism of sorts. Again, this isn't literal, but it like, particularly more so for Don, but it did for me as well. It like washed something off, and it's like washed something old away and germinated a seed that was inside of Don all along. He had to let go of something so that something else could grow, some newfound like exuberance for life, and at a bare minimum. Again, I'm don't look into that too much. I mean, that's not me trying to preach or anything, but it's just, hopefully that kind of makes sense, like what that did. And because I've had that happen many times in my life, where you have these, like, I don't know if I want to call it a brush with death, but it just really, like a reset button, really changes how you think. And I remember as a kid, my dad was a very, very hardworking man. And my mom and dad, both very hardworking people. We farmed. My mom would milk cows twice a day, 7 days a week, would take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to milk the cows. She would do that every morning, every night. She would work as an office manager at a local cooperative. She'd work about 60 hours a week, sometimes as many as 80 hours a week, still milking cows, driving tractor, throwing hay bales, feeding us kids. And my dad was working all the time too. My brother and I, my sister, she, did a lot of the domestic stuff, so I don't want to say she wasn't working or anything, but she helped out in the house and she did a lot of different things too. But my brother and I, we were working. I mean, since my dad probably would bust my chops on this a little bit, but I mean, we were 12 years old. We were working harder than 95% of the grown men do these days. I can say that, and with a very much a straight face. I mean, in summer vacation, my brother and I were working at least 60, if not 80 plus hours a week. And not that we're the hardest working people in the world, but I mean, we had to work, and any farmer out there knows that. And there's a lot of people that probably worked harder than I did. Don't get me wrong. I just want to just give you some insight to what my childhood was like. The bank was seemingly on our heels all the time. Not that my parents necessarily got me all involved in the finances, but I recognized, it was tough. It was tough. My parents were very few people that actually survived farming. We were dairy farmers. We raised potatoes. We did a lot of things just to make a few extra bucks to make ends meet. But anyways, I mean, I remember like the sweetest thing in life almost, to a large extent. I mean, I got to play sports and do things. I'm not going to say that I was like totally deprived or anything, but I just remember the satisfaction, like how that would feel to like plow a field or disc a field, and you might start on it. It might take you all day for a big field. We're not in big, huge farm country, as you can see here. And again, this was 30 years ago, but I just remember as a kid, like that satisfaction that I'd feel when my dad would show up, if I was the one, plowing or disking or whatever, and I'd come. And for my dad, I always wanted to please him. And if I worked all day long and then he came to check up on me, usually he'd come get me. Sometimes they'd milk cows without, if I was out in the field, or my brother or whoever it was, sometimes he'd have to come home and help with chores, whatever. But I'd be there alone with a tractor. I mean, sometimes we'd be out there all day, no water bottle, no lunch, no nothing. You just drove tractor for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever it was. You just kept driving the tractor until somebody came and picked you up. And I just remember the way that would feel if he came there and he was happy, that he, was good job, looks good. Like, that's about all you got. But that good job, that meant that meant an awful lot. And as followers of Jesus, it's our job to prepare the soil. A Christ follower, it's also his job to plant seeds. And that is, well, and to water and cultivate the crop. And that is, there's metaphors for that in the Bible. Jesus uses a lot of parables, metaphors, analogies, whatever you want to call them, parables. He definitely uses a lot of parables. But basically that every Christ follower had the plow that we're to do. It's different for everybody. We're to minister to others. At times, we're to plant the seed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. At times, we're to water it. We're to help those people. We're to cultivate that. We're to fellowship with one another. We're supposed to be neighboring farmers. We're supposed to help fellow believers. And there's different times probably for all of us to maybe do all of those things. And it's God, it's the Father, it's God who's the one who's driving the combine. He's the one that is going to reap the harvest of us, our eternal dwelling, our salvation. Well, I guess our salvation comes through Jesus, but he's the one that's going to be the one to sift the wheat from the chaff. And when we do that, when we do the work, when we cultivate the field, when we plant it, when we till the ground, when we plant the seeds, and when we do the cultivating and the watering, our Father is going to come and he's going to reward us. And in Matthew 25, verse 21, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Matthew 25, verse 20, chapter 25, verse 21, his Lord said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord." That's the ESV, the English Standard Version, I think it's called. The New International Version of Matthew 25, verse 21, his master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." I don't think life really gets any better than that. And I think that's like our eternal goal, if you will, or our eternal prize, is to share in God's happiness, to rest in his love and his joy and experience his glory. And I feel so strongly that many of you watching these videos, you can relate to hard work. You know, you know what that is. You've done it. And you understand, you know, you build something. If you're a carpenter and you build something, you work with your hands, and Jesus was a carpenter. You work with your hands and you build something, or you're a mechanic or a construction worker, or maybe you sell insurance or whatever, but you're able to help people and you're able to add value to people's lives. I think you know what I'm talking about. You understand that, like, inner peace, that satisfaction that you feel. It's not like, it's not a vacation in the Bahamas or something like that. There's no real glory to it, but it's just that inner peace and satisfaction. And I believe when you're doing the Lord's work, that's similar to what that feeling is like, but so much better. And Don, as I mentioned, he's all about me sharing this story. And I did it on video, and I just believe that event got his hands back on the plow. and that it reinvigorated him. It put new life into him at a bare minimum. And he told me that after the fact, he said his marriage was better, his relationship with his kids was better. He was a better grandfather because of it. And I just got some news here about a couple of weeks ago that Don has cancer. I know it's in his bones. He's taking chemo, but I suspect Don's grip on that plow is tighter than ever. And I wanted to share this story because I'm hoping that I wanted to bathe him in as much prayer as we possibly can. And so with that, I just want to offer a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful weather that we've been having, Lord. Thank you for your grace, your mercy. Thank you for the tribulations that you allow in our lives that we oftentimes don't understand as we go through them. And thank you that when we cling to you, that you draw us closer, that those events draw us closer to you. Lord, I'd ask for a special blessing over Don. Give him the strength, him and his family, give him strength to seek you in this process, to continue to fight, to try to overcome this bodily adversary, the struggle that he's going through, Lord. If it is your will, take this from his earthly body, restore him to full health. But at a bare minimum, Lord, just give him the strength to lock his hands onto your plow. Help him to keep you first place in his heart. Be with him every step along this journey. Give his family comfort again, Lord. Bring the right people into his lives that can help him, the doctors and others that can help him along. And Lord, I thank you. Thank you for that hunt that we had. I thank you to this day that we were able to climb out of that water, Lord. Thank you for the lessons that we've learned. Thank you for Don's willingness to share his story, that others may be blessed by it. And I ask you again, Lord, just be with Don, be with his family. You know what they need, and we ask for this in Jesus' name. Also, if you would like to order this story on DVD, you can find this on my website. I mean, if you want to order 10 of these puppies, by all means do so. Give them away as gifts. It's a great story, I'd like to think. But I mean, it's a powerful story. I mean, there's a lot of it. Probably I tell it better in the video because I'm able to sit down, write it, and do voiceover and stuff, but it is a great video. That said, I am in the process of putting this video on YouTube, so there will be commercials in it. The DVDs obviously are commercial free. So if you want to just watch it on YouTube, even if you don't want to watch it on YouTube, I would love nothing more, and that's why I'm putting it on YouTube. I would love nothing more than to flood that video with comments and support for Don. I do think you will be very much inspired by his story. So again, please share this message. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. I'll probably won't get this out. Might be a day or two until after this is this Trust the Guide video is out. So please share that. Please subscribe. And I want to, as a challenge for you, I would like to challenge you to read Matthew 13, chapter 13, verses 24 to 30. It's the parable of the wheat and tares. It'll really complement what we talked about here today, I feel. So just look that up on the internet, read it. Read it in different translations if you want to, but study that a little bit. You search the internet and you'll find a lot about it. It's pretty powerful parable that he gave us. So with that, yeah, just kind of, I don't know, kind of been on an emotional journey here the last day or two once I kind of decided that this was the message I was going to share. But definitely I still live real close to Don, so I'm going to go and visit him. And so I would sincerely appreciate it. Any kind of support and prayers that you're able to give Don and his family would definitely mean a lot to me. So until our next campfire, let the Spirit lead. And I hope you enjoyed this beautiful backdrop. That's why I did it during the day rather than the night. It's been so beautiful, this frost and snow clinging to the trees. Man, it's been beautiful. As a matter of fact, I'll just do a little pan here. These trees, man, it's just been awesome. I was cross-country skiing for a couple of hours today. It's simply beautiful. And there's the tree stand that I spent an embarrassing amount of hours on this fall building it, but it's pretty sweet. I got a hip roof and plexiglass windows. I got shutters up on it now, so didn't shoot any deer out of it, but it looks nice.